Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the post 14, The Toxic Referee. This post comes via request from BG. I'm using initials for obvious reasons, noting the topic, but BG has been a great friend that I've made in the last few years through this vlog series, and BG has confronted so many challenging, problematic, difficult moments in her higher education career. And I want to make the point that what I'm talking about today expands far beyond higher education or education more generally. There is, though, a reason why toxicity and the toxic referee is proliferating at this point in our history more than others. Why now? Well, toxicity is a characteristic of not only competitive workplaces, but brittle leadership. Let me explain what I mean. When leaders were appointed on the basis of expertise, experience, credibility, and that expertise was verified, it was accountable, it was transparent through a diversity of communities, then it meant that that leader had credibility more widely. So they weren't questioned, they had, if you will, personal and professional followership. We'll talk about that later. So these colleagues were professionally outstanding, personally outstanding, and they had been verified through a diversity of different refereeing protocols, appointment protocols, as being outstanding. And of course, this excellence was confirmed and verified through a series of advisory boards and so forth. But what we've got now is a series of leaders being appointed who do not have experience or expertise and have been appointed and verified in that appointment by unrepresentative bodies and boards. And they lack expertise in the industry or the profession in which they are working. Now, this has been common in universities in the last 15 years. And the reason that these problematic leaders have emerged is because problematic chancellors have been hired. Because chancellors that have been hired that have no expertise in higher education as a profession, as a series of professions, or indeed as an industry. And of course, we need to note in the last 15 years the profound changes to academic boards, academic councils. Originally, academic councils were filled with academics and student representatives. Through these 15 years, fewer and fewer academics have had any representative function on academic councils at all. So what this means is that we currently have a culture that is lacking transparency and lacking accountability. And particularly we see this in leadership appointments. So we see a lack of excellence in leadership appointments, and that leads to our post 2, the Peter principle, because once a mediocre leader has been hired, the only option they have is to hire other mediocre people around them that won't show them up. And can I also say, this is the important bit of our conversation today, this system or structure puts the leader under incredible stress. Think about it. Can you imagine the stress of being a leader working every day and being frightened, being scared that you're going to be found out on a daily basis, going into meetings every single day, knowing that a distinguished person can call out your lack of expertise? Think about the stress on that person. And that stress is what creates our brittle organisational cultures, where staff spend the bulk of their time trying to protect themselves rather than doing any sort of work to public good. And of course, we see this also in the proliferation of what's often called busy work. Basically pointless tasks that are not connected to the core business of a particular organisation. In the case of universities, not connected to the core business of teaching, of research and of community service. So for all our friends in universities out there, hi, think about how much of our days are filled with completely pointless tasks. So this is the context in which toxic referees emerge. Toxic referees have always existed while there's been sort of mad, angry, disturbed people working in workplaces, which is the history of work. While those sort of angry people, nasty people have been in workplaces, toxic referees have existed. But there is no doubt that they are now increasing in their number. And it's particularly a problem now because university academics are eating our own young. We are blocking the next generation from progressing and creating restructures after restructures after restructures means that good people, good staff are fighting for their jobs rather than fighting or struggling for the public good, however that may be defined. So to address BG's concrete problem about how to manage a toxic referee, I'm going to offer 3 layers of advice: short-term advice, medium-term advice, and of course long-term advice. And you need to start the long-term advice today, but we'll talk about that now. But I do want to start with 2 truths of my professional life. The first is obviously from doctoral education. Nothing matters more than the selection of examiners, because the selection of examiners is our only confirmation of quality assurance and research integrity. And if we dumb down, hate to use that phrase, but if we dumb down doctoral examination, we may as well close our universities. That's how important the selection of examiners is and will remain in our institutions. But my second truth is also clear. No professional relationship matters more than maintaining that relationship with your referees. Referees are precious. They are the spine of your very career. They are the foundation for your professional life. So while I am going to talk about toxic referees, please also remember the importance of maintaining ethical, decent, kind, compassionate relationships with the good people that exist, that become your good referees. So before I enter that advice for BG, I just wanted to provide 2 stories for you to show the impact of toxic referees on your entire life. Now, the first story, of course, is mine. Most of you know I had a truly dreadful PhD supervisor, hashtag understatement. Did not read the work, would not meet with me, and in fact didn't even sign off my examination process. He was not prepared to sign off my thesis to be examined, right? Now, he had no PhD completions. I was his first. Surprise. But what's interesting is he was already an associate professor, quite senior in the Australian system, without any PhD completions. That wouldn't happen now, but that's important. But anyway, he was my PhD supervisor during the period where you had a sole supervisor, so only one. So for my first few years as an academic, he was endlessly consulted as a referee, even though I never actually nominated him. After I won a national teaching award, this gentleman was consulted once more for my promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer. Now, he wrote me a rubbish reference, describing me as a, quote, okay teacher, noting that the previous week I'd won the National Teaching Award as the best teacher in the country, but also that he didn't like my research very much, didn't see much there, even though as a lecturer I'd produced a singly authored scholarly monograph and 40 singly authored articles. Okay. Now, luckily the university had asked for 6 referee reports, 6, and 5, the other 5, were absolutely outstanding. But of course, here comes the rub. How did I know he wrote me a rubbish reference? Well, my then head of school called me into his office one afternoon and he pulled the reference out of a drawer in his desk and he read me the reference. And then he said, I'm not going to present this, and he tore it up in front of me and put it in the bin. So he didn't present that reference and I was promoted. Now, I never used that supervisor again. I removed him from my CV. I removed any mention of this person for the rest of my career. Yeah. Cut to story 2. This one involves my late husband, Professor Steve Redhead. This is a ripper. He was applying for promotion to professor. By this point he had 10 books, he had millions of dollars, pounds, euros in funding, and of course he had invented entirely new disciplines and tropes and paradigms. So, hello, pretty clear, one would think. But he was knocked back from promotion the first time he applied. And he had no sense about why that had happened. But a friend of his was giving him a lift after cricket training one week. And this guy, friend of his, was very high up in HR in this university. And they were both on the university staff cricket team. Now, this guy said to Steve in the car, you're not hearing this from me, but never use blank blank as your referee ever again. The reason you were not promoted is because of that man's reference. Okay. And what was so mysterious to Steve is this man had been his friend for 20 years. Steve had written references supporting him through promotion, supporting his books, supporting his articles and career. So he thought he had a friend for 2 decades. And this is the man that wrote him a shocking reference. Now, Steve never used him again and he was promoted. But what was amazing for the rest of his life, and indeed after his death, this guy continued to be friendly, talk about how great the relationship was, what a great man Steve was. But we know when he had one opportunity to write a reference to make a difference, he wrote a toxic reference and knifed his mate. Yeah, good. Yeah. So we think people are going to be balanced. We think people are going to be evidence-driven, that they're going to be ethical. So that's not the case. But we can put in place some strategies to provide ways to block the toxic referee. Let's do this. The most important advice I will offer you is gather up as many colleagues, as many referees as you can through the great spread or spectrum of your professional life. Do not put all your eggs in one basket of a supervisor or advisor. Hell no. So many supervisory relationships go wrong. You need to go into that relationship thinking that it may end badly. I know that's very depressing and old goth, but you've got to do that. So have an array of colleagues that you've worked with who know you, who know your research, and in tough times, you're going to have to call in favours. Also, so important, do not use placeholder PhD supervisors. Now, this is so important. I recently have a student who I have a wonderful relationship with. She's absolutely amazing. Met with her weekly, did a fantastic PhD. Brilliant. But she had a co-supervisor who was pretty dreadful, in fact was dreadful. She met with her once in the 3 years, and during that meeting she provided her with particularly bad advice, can I say. And so therefore had no other meetings with her, no other dealings with her. But then this lass needed 2 referees when she was applying for work at the conclusion of her PhD. So this associate supervisor that she never changed, she didn't know at all, so could not be used as a referee, wouldn't have even really remembered her name, knew nothing about her. But the person that she did have an authentic relationship with over the long term, who'd seen her entire candidature and could offer a commentary, is my husband, Jamie Quinton, a physicist. So Jamie and I went referees for her, and she got that job and Jamie will be a referee for her for the rest of her life. But you see the problem. If you have a placeholder supervisor, then you haven't got a referee, so you need to have an authentic relationship in some form with the co-supervisor and choose them carefully. So through your undergraduate years, make every single relationship with a teacher, with a tutor, with a researcher, a positive one. Now, people talk about networking. I'm not a big networking person because I believe we all should be decent, ethical, kind, compassionate people and have decent, authentic relationships with the people around us. And if you do that, that's not networking, that's just being a decent person. But if you do that, by the conclusion of your PhD, you will have probably 10 prospective referees. So write to people that you've met in conferences, that you've read and enjoyed their research. Be positive in the construction of a workplace and an academic culture. And authentic relationships and referees are built on that foundation. Also, this is the challenging bit, if you can, in these short-term strategies, build relationships with other industries. So do not think that line managers and supervisors are the only referees that matter. That is wrong. So start to work on your community partnerships and your organisations. Start to work with your relationships with librarians, the relationship with community activists and leaders, and also your relationship with different layers of government. So in the short term, build up these relationships and collaborations and stay in touch with these people. And when the time comes for you to find a referee, these authentic relationships provide the backbone for your list. But for BG, remember that the short-term advice must always be when you discover that someone is a toxic referee, right? And you will probably find out accidentally, like I did, like Steve did, then never use them again. Never give them a chance to hurt you again. Cut them out. Cut them out. And that includes if it is your PhD supervisor or advisor. If you're enrolled in a program and your PhD supervisor is a dreadful human, then that's a good reason during the program to move away from them. Now, yes, a PhD advisor or supervisor is very valuable to you during the PhD program itself, but their true value, to be frank, is the 30 years after you've graduated. Now, I've written references for my students through their entire career, 30 years, right up to when they applied for promotion to professor, and they got it. So if you haven't got that relationship, then wow, you need that relationship. So select a supervisor who is a reliable human and can write a reference for you for at least 30 years. Now, if it's too late, and for many of you watching this high, like me, it's too late, then simply cut that person out of your life and create an alternative supervisory list, if you will. And it may be from your co-supervisor, it may be from your advisory panel in the North American model, it may be external advisors in the British model, or it may even end up being your examiners. All of that's fine. But the short-term strategies must begin with, can you trust this person? And if you cannot trust this person, do not use them as a referee. And also, let's get sort of a bit goth on this. If you can't verify that they're writing you a reference, if you've been knocked back from something and you really don't know why, then the chances are it's your referee. So if you can't absolutely guarantee them, don't use them. Okay, they're the short-term strategies. Let's now move to the really interesting, important ones, the medium-term strategies. Now, the short-term strategies are almost a bit accidental. They rely on the relationships you've created through your undergraduate and your graduate qualifications, with hopefully, if you're lucky, some connections with industry or community groups. The medium-term strategy for referee development, this is much more planned. This is almost a 5-year plan. So this is where you start to build up concrete relationships with journal editors and publishers. Now, these relationships are everything. Yes, they'll help your career, but they'll also help your research enormously. So therefore, start to develop a wide net of journal publications. Go through refereeing. Keep in touch with the editors. Thank them for their work. Wish them, season's greetings, whatever particular nation or faith structure they have. So take that very narrow research relationship and render it larger and more expansive through your career. These medium-term strategies also focus on industry partnerships and community engagement. Now, you may have been lucky as a PhD student or an early career researcher, and you had that industry research partnership, or you had a liaison role with government. Now, most of us don't have those chances, but this is the period where you start to get to know and work with people in industry and people in government. And look, they might be quite junior in government, and that's great. That's great. You're quite junior. So what happens is your careers start to develop in parallel. Now, it's the same with professional and community organisations. Hold memberships of these professional organisations. Occupy a role in a committee, and then the other committee members can act as referees for you. So this is the stage of your career where I describe that you need to start working horizontally. Outside, if you will, of your one particular industry, look to other industries, look to other governmental layers, also look to community organisations, because the diversity of referees that you're gathering at this point will enable you to apply for a diversity of roles later on in your career. Boom. So to give you an example, I list 15 referees on my CV. And those referees include the head librarian of an elite British university, the editor of a large publishing house, the mayor of a regional city, a colleague from the Times Higher Education organisation, a colleague I worked with to develop sexual assault and sexual harassment policies, 2 colleagues I've worked with to enable Indigenous partnerships and Indigenous research codes of conduct, alongside line managers, research colleagues, senior professional staff, colleagues I've taught with through my career. So the reason that diversity exists is when one is a senior academic, #close to death, it means that you have to demonstrate to different selection committees your expertise through a diversity of areas and professions and fields. So as an early career researcher, you have a very specific focus on teaching and research. Of course you have. But in this medium-term strategy, start to work these horizontal relationships with diverse organisations for me. It'll make an incredible difference. Let's now finish off with the long-term strategies. Throughout your career, please remain connected with every single member of your refereeing list, because every referee is precious. So don't disrespect them, don't neglect them, don't be weird, don't be desperate, and actually deal with them as humans. So in other words, they're not just your referee, they're fully fleshed humans. Ask them about their family, ask them about their career, ask if the relationship can be reciprocal in some form. And I have conservatively, about 50 people that I can ask to go referee for me at any time. Now, I've known most of that 50 over 20 years. And there's a fair number of Vice-Chancellors and former Vice-Chancellors, Deputy Vice-Chancellors and former Deputy Vice-Chancellors in that list, because they have been remarkable, inspirational, extraordinary people in my life. They're great people, and it is my privilege to continue to know them. So these long-term relationships matter a lot, and they build on that medium-term strategy we've just talked about. So for all those colleagues from community organisations, industry partnerships, research partnerships that you worked on in that middle term, the pretty junior people you met, they're now as senior as you are. And they've been promoted through their career like you have been. And I'll give you my favourite example of this. It's from the Times Higher Education. When I was a professor in the United Kingdom, I wrote a weekly column for the Times Higher Education. And I had a wonderful sub-editor, a very junior gentleman, that once a week I would send him the article and he would publish it on the website, which is great. So had a great relationship with him. He's brilliant. Now that reasonably junior sub-editor is now the head of the Times Higher Education global rankings. So, you know, that's quite an interesting referee to put on your CV. Similarly, a person I knew, I was the chairman of a board of a local conservatorium. He's now the head of a national symphony orchestra. So this is where social media matters a great deal. I have very different strategies for all the different platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, obviously podcasts and videos such as this. But to be frank with you, I make Facebook very different. Facebook is a very special place for me and I use it very differently because that's the place where I have my deep, long-term relationships with people. Let me explain. Most of us as academics move through our careers. So whenever I'm in a location, like I am at this point in temporary accommodation still, 99.9999999% of the people I know of my friends are not in this location. We all move a long way from the place that we were born. But Facebook for me provides a very strong digital simulacrum because I have the daily relationships with the friends in my life, and that matters a lot. So if something's going wrong, I'm there, right? I'm there. So Facebook provides me with a fantastic service because I can have the digital, authentic relationships with people and be there at the moment when they need me, and that's a tremendous gift. But therefore, make sure you've got a social media plan, and that feeds into your refereeing plan. I preserve Facebook for my very important long-term personal relationships, and these long-term relationships must be authentic and real, and they matter. Now, you may use LinkedIn particularly early on in your career to sort of meet people and get into sort of the program. That's how people use LinkedIn a lot. And Twitter, I think, works well in the medium term to start to develop those horizontal relationships. But if someone is going to write you a reference for 30 years or 50 years, then it has to be an authentic relationship, a meaningful relationship. So don't just sort of contact the referee when you need them. You know those people, like you don't hear from them for 5 years and it's like, hi Phil, will you guys referee for me? Nah, your referees are humans. Have an authentic relationship with them, and then they will support you through your professional life. Now, I've only ever refused refereeing to 2 of my PhD students in my entire career. Now, one of them was a student I took over as a rescue supervision. The previous supervisor had taken out a restraining order on her. And to be frank, she was pretty frightening. And so I could not, in all ethical candor, support her entering a workplace. And the second student was actually a former student. She'd graduated at this point and she'd simply lost control. I was in a job and she was bossing me about, trying to tell me to, she was just turning up randomly, telling me to cancel meetings with other people because she was the most important person and I was neglecting her when I was actually doing my job. Now again, in all conscience, I couldn't recommend that person to any organisation because self-absorption is the last characteristic we need in a university workplace at the moment. And this therefore leads to my final advice to all of you, to all of us who through our career, we will be referees. And my final advice is, don't lie. Don't pretend to write a good reference for somebody and actually knife them. So when I'm asked to write a reference for a seriously worrying person, doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and this person is a dreadful teacher, I'm concerned about their research ethics, or they're really just a nasty bit of goods, then I don't act as a referee for them. So please, do not write a bad reference. Don't. Really, really don't. When you're asked to write a reference for a reasonably troubled person, say no. That's a kind no. That's a no with kindness. And the phrase I use, and it might be useful for you, is, quote, I am not in a position to write a reference for you at this time. I use that. So it's general, but it's clear and it's kind. And look, if anything is going to change our academic culture, and we can find a strategy to discard these toxic referees, then it's going to come from honesty. It's going to come from integrity. And it's going to come from compassion. Because we need to be the change that we want to see. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.